One, two, one, two. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2.
1 2 1 2 1 2 2.
One two. One two. One two. One two. One two.
Okay, in other words, feedback, yeah. Yeah, okay, totally. Yes. Or he gave feed directly from mixer or not. Okay. Re ke tla mo sheba he. Ke tla lo mo sheba. Hona le kile nka molalela mbotsa nna ke mang. Ntate Chomane. Kopa automate. Ke nana ha ile jwalo go tlo ba le. E tlo etsa feedback. Ntate Chomane kana ke mang tswana na go tsa mabaka. Cause re hloka fela ba tlo go bula. Neo. Kgone ho lokile. Re tla kopa. Ya bua ne. Ntate ko re ha o so le ha re ka itlwela the way bana se dira. Di-echo tsena wa bona ba tshwanetse go ba se utlwala directly mona because of these mics. So now to minimize that, se a nke o take over the audio then audio e tlo ba wa bona ka mokgwa e change ka se tlo ba clean sure without clean so ke ne le hle mola ha o ka botsa bafana ba spanang
first attack ya ka ye
Tinggal, kamu start kan? Baru start. Follow bisa. Aku tu mula aku di, tak udah asal bisa. Dia nak hilang kan? Ko, so kalau mana?
Is that live? Is it fine? Hello? Still not clear. Hello? Huh? Hello? Yeah? Is it not open? It's open. Hello? Testing? 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 Okay. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues. We are about to start. May I ask that the colleagues who might be standing outside to come and join us before we start with the program to minimize the disturbance that could be with the walk-ins.
Testing one.
Our program had to be adjusted a bit, and I take it that all of us have a program in front of us. However,
1, 2. 1, 2.
the technology is being worked on at the moment. And in our program here, we are supposed to have started at 8:30, but from 8:30 to 10:40, those items will stand down for a moment. We will start with an item at 10:40 in your program. This item will be the first item of our agenda. But before we start with the program, I'm going to invite our Chief Director, Mr. Steve Ngoma, who's going to do the welcoming and pave the way for the colloquium. With his few words, Brother Steve, please come through.
Good morning, colleagues. You are welcome. My name is Stephen Mgoma. I'm the Acting Chief Director for Sustainable Resource Management within Provincial Treasury. It's not always good to start with an apology, but rather let me acknowledge your patience. We should have started a long time ago. We really apologize for that, but we really thank you for bearing with us in this regard. I have received an apology from my HOD, Mr. Singh, HOD of Provincial Treasury. She'll be joining us a bit late. One of our colleagues was involved in an accident yesterday, so she's in a hospital, so she had to quickly go and check on that colleague of ours. We hope that we wish him a speedy recovery. The second one is the issue about our MEC. She is going to join us today, but there is a meeting. I think there are two issues that have two developments. She has a meeting with agriculture, an agent meeting, and then there will be a farewell for Dr. Bertas Venter. So immediately after that, she will be joining us. So she will be part of the meeting. I think we'll still give her a space to to give us her keynote address. Colleagues, this is our 6th annual Free State Provincial Research Colloquium. We had to think very hard in terms of the theme of this research. We also reflected on the issues of your National Development Plan, your 2030 vision, key issues there about the issues about the scourge of poverty, unemployment, inequality, and so forth, inequity that we are seeing in our country. And we also had to look in terms of what is happening in our own province with regard to the issues of poverty, the very same issues, unemployment, your very stagnant economic growth that is not creating any employment for within the province. So we decided to come with this theme, thinking beyond the current economic challenges towards sustainable economic growth and development. And we think of here we were also indicating that we want to talk about economic challenge growth that will touch the lives of the ordinary citizens of the province. So we're hoping that as we welcome our speakers today, our researchers, to come and share with us the best practices and what is happening globally, developments in terms of economic growth, what is it that we can learn as a province, and try to maybe stimulate the growth of the economic growth of the province. One of the issues, colleagues, that we have raised here is that, you know, if you look at the documents, you can go through all the documents of government in terms of the economic growth. They are singling one issue very sharply, the issue of infrastructure investment. So we're not doing good as a province in terms of infrastructure investment. It's not an issue of money. We do get the conditional grants that we should be using for infrastructure development. The thinking here is that as you put more development, your infrastructure development, at least it has the potential to create, to grow the economy and thus create some job opportunities for our people. So we're not doing good in that space. We're hoping that some of the discussions will also touch on that and just be open and be critical in terms of what is happening within the space of government. What is that we can do better as government? You know, it's always better to have someone outside of government to tell you what is it that you can do better and what is that you are doing bad as a government. So we're hoping that those discussions will assist us. And colleagues, I will also indicate that we were supposed to have an opening and welcome by Vice Chancellor of the institution, Matt Dube. So we had some challenges in terms of confirmation of dates, and not dates as such, but confirmation of the colloquium, and we communicate very late with most of you colleagues because of our internal challenges. But we really appreciate you and thank you for bearing with us in this in that regard. So Matt Dube might also join us very late or tomorrow, and the very same thing with Ndate, Dr. Pera Ndate Midupi. He will be joining us tomorrow. He's still coming, but he will be part of the discussions for tomorrow. So colleagues, I'm hoping that it will be a very fruitful discussions, and let us be open and let's discuss, let's raise questions, give us pointers in terms of what needs to be done in government in terms of growing our provincial economy. So without further ado, Mr. Midupi, we've wasted a lot of time. Let me then give back to you, my colleague, and then you can take us through the program of the day. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I think the path has now been paved. We have now been welcomed into the colloquium and can easily then declare it open. The discussions that we are now going to be getting into relates to sustainable growth and development, and the question there is that can leadership benefit from research? And we'll be led in this discussion by Professor Potgieter from the National School of Government. A round of applause to welcome him.
Good morning, colleagues. I trust you can hear me. When looking at the term colloquium, as well as, of course, the notion of leadership, I thought, how can we link it? And why could research be important for leaders? So I do not want to say anything about the Free State. Firstly, I'm a guest here. Secondly, I like the Free State and I like coming to the Free State. So I don't want provincial policemen to stop me when I want to cross the Vaal River next time. And thirdly, I'll probably be talking nonsense, because situations are always much more complex than what they seem on the surface. Let me just start my stopwatch. So we have been talking just now, or it was briefly mentioned, the idea of the NDP. Sorry, let me just see if I can move this closer. I'm audible, you can hear me, eh? Right. Now, you've seen in the news in the last few days, specifically the last week, there is a lot being said about the NDP, specifically the 10-year review of the NDP, and the fact that we have not achieved what we wanted to achieve, and that judging by our performance up to this stage, specifically of note is the fact that the economy failed to grow as we thought it would grow. We thought we would be sitting at about 5% growth rate at this stage. We are at about 1.2%. And we also see, according to the report of the 10-year review, that the economy is not sufficiently structured to serve all South Africans. So our age-old problems in South Africa, namely problems of poverty and equality to start with, has been exacerbated due to a variety of things. We must also remember, in the case of South Africa, that we have really faced a perfect storm for a number of years. You know, recently COVID-19 and the impact of COVID, that was vast. It impacted vast on our country, and of course many countries in the developing world. Secondly, of course, the impact of the conflict in Ukraine. That is a reality also, again, for the developing world. You know what is just, and there's probably some economists in the room, what is just surprising to me is if something happens elsewhere, we get hiding. Our currency takes a dip, and a variety of issues like that. So these problems are complex. They are multifaceted, but so are the solutions. And the solutions are, yes, not only within the global context, but also many things that we can do within South Africa. So what am I saying today? I'm saying that we need to analyze, we need to understand, and in that process gain insight in terms of where we can go to. So the link between research and development is therefore glaringly obvious. Good research, policy development, and action is what is necessary. And the same refers to strategy. You know, strategy is just simply three things: ends, ways, and means. Decide on what we want to achieve, the way that we want to achieve it, and the means. What do we need in terms of resources? But the challenge then is in the action part. And we will see that many schools of business, as well as schools of governance across the world, are focusing exactly on that, from strategy to action, because that is sometimes where the real problem is. We know that research, can I continue? That research is propelling humanity forward. We know what we have gained from research results through the ages. Also in the public service, research is a given. And research in public services across the world has got a wide scope. Also at the NSG we conduct research. Our research focus is also quite wide, and we have quite a wide mandate. We focus on teaching and learning, obviously, because we're a school of government. We focus on training needs analysis. This is quite important too, and we've done quite a few within the context of your province, both on local as well as provincial level. capacity building needs are. And then, of course, we focus on relevant theoretical aspects and the functions of state. If we are the School of Government, we must understand what the state is about. Research studies then on the lived experience inform practice. How can we understand what we need to do if we do not understand the lived experience of citizens? And of course, they provide evidence. But important then in terms of research is the standards that must be adhered to, and we must understand that we need to adhere to standards. Leadership is a well-studied phenomenon, and one of the issues that I want to speak today specifically is the notion of effective leadership to be informed. In other words, make the link between leadership and research, and how research can contribute. Now, the link between leadership and research contributes to understanding leadership development and challenges to leadership. The research body on leadership is quite wide. There's a lot of research that has been done. Crucial to leadership competencies is, of course, the analytical ability and effective that leaders must be able to do effective decision making. Effective and informed decision making, however, is based on data gathered using appropriate research methodologies. So I'm moving slowly towards the notion of research, quality evidence, and quality research. Research on leadership, focusing on the following things, and a lot has been said on leadership, and I think you probably au fait with a vast body of leadership research. But we need to understand successful leaders. We need to understand the role of successful leadership teams. And the notion of leadership teams is something specifically that has been more in the focus within the context of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And then, of course, what are the educational and professional development needs of leaders? This brings us to a very recent research phenomena within the context of leadership development, namely the importance of value-based leaderships, and that is specifically authentic, ethical, and servant leadership, and of course value-based leadership behavior. A lot of emphasis on the notion of values. Now going back to the research then, we've linked leadership and research, but what is important in research always is the notion of research ethics, because we need certain standards when we conduct research, and we must adhere to ethical principles. You will know from research that you have done, often your research proposal need to go through ethical committees, ethical clearance, etc. So, what researchers must do is, firstly, they must question things. They must be honest. They must follow appropriate processes. Consider rights and dignity, specifically if you work with sensitive topics. Consider comfortable and uncomfortable information. Yes, it's true. I've often, as a researcher, come across information that I don't particularly like. Also research on the history of South Africa. But it does not mean that you can ignore uncomfortable information. It is important to also share. Years ago, I was asked to do research for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And you get around information that you don't particularly want to write about, but it's there, and you need to be honest as researcher, and you need to record what you find. And then, of course, we need to consider relevant resources and make the correct conclusions. Now, a note here briefly is the notion of journalist versus research. And we know that journalists can sometimes tense up politicians, or most of the time. Journalists often can say what they want, as does the social media. With the Fourth Industrial Revolution, we thought we created the social media to bring people together. People will have a voice, and we will connect different opinions. The opposite has been true. In fact, we have created division. We have created polarization, etc., in terms of the social media. Just very interesting. The WHO did a study recently. It was published last year on youngsters. Now, that is the group below 40. Guys, for me, that's youngsters, eh? So, so they do a study on youth and the social media and, of course, information that they find on the social media. And they found that there has been a change. When COVID started, people read all of these things on the social media and they believed it. But as COVID evolved, they found that people started to question more and more what they find on the social media. And that they indicated, the young group of course, that they don't necessarily believe this, that they would rather check the information and check the information for validity. Now that is good news because it's important for us to check what we find and to make sure that it is viable and the validity of the information. Now, quality research and quality evidence is something that a lot has been said about, and of course one can talk a lot. I will just take you through a few points briefly. There's a distinction between quality research and quality evidence, the third bullet, and it's important that we need to clarify that. The concept of evidence or evidence-based about knowledge that are research-based. So we cannot say we make evidence-based decision-making if we do not have evidence that we get from research. Evidence must be research-based, but we cannot have quality evidence without quality research. So that is where the link to research comes in. If we want quality evidence, we need quality research, and we need research results that we can trust. It is important that the right questions are being asked regularly, because variables change. Just think if you're in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, or the Western Cape, or even the Eastern Cape, and you planned bridges and infrastructure, and then suddenly global warming came along, and our weather patterns change fundamentally. You have rivers coming down in torrents. In KwaZulu-Natal, was it last year? The rainfall that's equivalent to half a year fell in 2 days. Now, how is your infrastructure going to manage that? You see, so the variables that you must always consider changes, and there's always new information that you need to consider. I was surprised driving yesterday at rivers and dams. This is not yet summer, but many of them seem to be full, eh? So the dryness that's obvious is not necessarily obvious in your rivers and dams. So we need to ask questions of the relationship between phenomena, the relationship between things that we see and that we think we see. Is there a relationship between training and service delivery? Do well-trained officials necessarily provide better services? Is there a relationship between technology and learning? Do we learn better when we learn virtually? Is there a relationship between values and practices? If we know the values, do we practice them? Do we talk the talk or also walk the talk? And then which problems are there which actually persists, or which results are crucial for policy making, including budgets? And you might have seen yesterday, it was on the news, the Chief of the Navy, I used to be a naval officer years ago, said, you know the incident that occurred in Komiki with the submarine and the crew being washed overboard in bad conditions. So what did the Chief of the Navy link this to? To budgets. He said the Navy do not have sufficient budget. And the issue now is, do we budget sufficiently for defense in South Africa? Why is that so? 10 hours of experience at sea takes 10 hours. You cannot do what you have to do with 2 hours of experience if you need 10 hours of experience to understand the complexity of the task that you have to do. So the link here is obvious between budget and the way we deliver services. So research quality then relates to the scientific processes, while evidence quality is about the trustworthiness and judgment of research results, and of course the scientific processes. Now, how can we trust and have confidence in evidence? It depends on the following issues. How robust was the research? Was it rigorous, comprehensive? What resources were used and things like that? Did a proper analysis occur? Did we make deduction? Was there a dialectic process? Those of you that are Marxist or new Marxist will know the dialectics, eh? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and the way that we then achieve our results. Was there a logic? The simple logic is always important in research. The simple logic, for example, is this an ideal conference room? The question. So what do you look at? You look at sound, you look at virtual tools, you look at movement across the room, you might look at the colors. Yellow is a color that's supposed to be calming, and things like that. Now you cannot come in and say, no, the wool on the carpet is too short or too long. It does not make sense here. So you need that logic, you need that simple logic in your research processes. And your research title and your research question and your objectives always come from this. The question would be, is this the ideal conference room? The title would be room so-and-so as conference room. And the objectives would then be to check everything, all these things I have mentioned, and those would be your chapters in your research study or your different sections. So the logic must always be there. So the criteria for then evaluating or rating the strength of evidence is the quality. Is there quality in your research? Quantity. Did we have a variety of studies that showed the same results, and the consistency here? Was there consistency in terms of the results? So quality research and quality evidence, to finish off then, is why is quality research a prerequisite for quality evidence? Remember why we talk about quality evidence? Because we talk about evidence-based decision making. We say we want to use evidence for decision making, but to have quality evidence we need quality research. So there's just a few questions here with regards to that. We can refer to it as quality research if it is based on reliability of the research, reliable research. Research quality is about adherence to scientific methods. The research design need to be proper, the methodology need to be proper. We need to test for the quality of research, both quantitative as well as qualitative research. And of course, proper research processes highlight problem areas, causality, the notion of cause and effect, and make recommendations or suggest actions. Now, in research that we have done, we are public servants, and many of us do research within the context of public service. This is pre-COVID research we have done. The DPSA had a research forum, and we looked at the experience of researchers and asked them, what are the challenges that you have in the public service in terms of doing your work? And the following 7 issues actually came out as the most pressing issues that researchers identified. Infrastructure is lacking and the research function is not protected, so they do not necessarily see it as a career choice. Research results could be seen as a threat. There might be selective use of research results. Research units in departments are often dumping grounds. The institutionalization of research and monitoring and evaluation processes is often not there. The utilization of e-sources, there's not sufficient criticism when sources are used. And then public sector don't do research, they often just manage consultants. And this whole notion of the expectations that researchers should be spin doctors, meaning that you have to doctor the research results to actually fit into what somebody that commissioned the research want the research results to say. You know that the whole example of the room. You want to sell a new carpet, now you want the research results to show that the carpet is actually the wrong thing in this room. So you expect the researcher to be a spin doctor. Research approaches. So how can we approach research? We can do longitudinal or cohort studies. These are studies over a period of time. following participants that have a common characteristic. It might be participants that live in specific communities or that are of a specific age or of a specific socioeconomic group. Such research is actually very good for complexity and diversity challenges and actually addressing policy issues. It addresses siloed working, short-termism, and also preventative solutions. Good. So there was an interesting. Right. Shall we continue? In terms of longitudinal studies, very briefly, there was a study that was done by Dunedin. It's 50 years old. They followed all the children that was born in a specific year. And they said, but what impacts on how you turn out in life? Is it your genes or is it the environment? And after 50 years, and this study was replicated in many other societies, after 50 years they actually found that, listen here, it's a combination. You might carry a gene for schizophrenia, what's the terms? To be schizophrenic. But what enhances this gene is, for example, a use of a lot of marijuana before the age of 17. If you don't use a lot of marijuana before the age of 17, this gene might not come out in later life. You know, things like that they showed, and this was replicated amongst others in Philadelphia, in Japan, and in other societies. That is what we call a longitudinal study. We follow a specific cohort over a period of time. You know, like I say in South Africa, it's important also from the socioeconomic kind of view. Interdisciplinary studies. The information and the knowledge in one discipline is not enough. We need to connect disciplines. I just did something for an American book on healthy oceans, oceans health, and the impact, of course, of climate change, also on the economic activities in the maritime domain. So what do you have to do? You have to understand how climate change affects it, why fish move, what the impact is of poaching of fish. And Parlemoen, you know that there was actually a Parlemoen factory. Parlemoen is abalone, the shellfish that you find in the south. There was actually a abalone factory in Bloemfontein, in Universitas. They confiscated about 6 million rands of abalone in Bloemfontein earlier this year, where they dried. Now, all of these things have an impact. I don't want to talk about abalone. I'm just saying that problems are complex. And if you have to understand them, you often need to utilize various disciplines. And then, of course, the idea of case studies. Case studies is quite important to understand specific things. Case studies are often also interdisciplinary problems. But the advantage of a case study is you can delve into depth. You can have richness within one study. So these are the most prominent approaches, I think, that we can use as researchers in the public service. Now, in terms of case studies, we have published a book with a number of case studies. The Free State University of the Free State contributed 2 chapters. One was on innovation, the other one was on the child support grant to this book, and we also had case studies from Africa. So it provided us with good comparative information also. So case studies then provide us the opportunity to make sense of complex phenomena. We refer to it as the sense-making process, and to also link theory with practice. So that is the advantages that case studies provide us to. Case studies is also an important learning tool, and they can contribute to equipping public servants with a better understanding of such complex phenomena, and how to deal with such challenges. So we try to, in the project, to also work in teaching and learning notes. that is available for every case study. How can you teach now? And the case studies were vast. What we did at the second bullet, we focused on the executive function of the state, the whole idea of the social contract. What is the executive functions of the state? In other words, why do the state exist? Firstly, caring, protecting. We created the state. Why? Because we want the state to care for us and to protect us. We want to live in a safe environment. Secondly, promotion of the quality of life. And thirdly, enabling or facilitating for success, to create the infrastructure. There was reference earlier today to infrastructure projects. So this is why we created the state. This is the essence of the social contract, and that is what we focused on. In terms of reflection and responses that we have had on this research, and I would like to just focus on the bullets at the bottom of it, there's a lot of pertinent aspects that comes from it. But notably are, of course, issues of political will. Yes, we can have this research. We can have this research results, but they will go nowhere if there's not political will in terms of implementation. Then, of course, also the interrelatedness of problems across spheres. It's rarely just a provincial problem or just a problem of a local municipality. It is sometimes a manifestation of a greater national or international problem. The consistent message in all of these was, of course, improve governance and fight corruption. So much of the issues that were lacking was governance issues and, of course, the notion of consequence management. Research that we have done on oversight documents a few years ago. We looked at Auditor General documents, we look at the BRRR reports of the portfolio committees, we looked at the Parliamentary Monitoring Group, we looked at the Public Service Commission, all of the oversight bodies, and we said, but what is it that comes out? What must we do? Of course, financial management, supply chain management, things like that was at the top. But one of the surprises in this was the notion of consequence management. And say, but listen here, you need to better address consequent management as a gap area. So that's one of the issues that came out. Important also the idea to address problems when they surface. If not, the crisis will become worse. The relevance of case studies to the wider public service administration, and here if we say administration, we do not mean the subject area, we mean the institutions of government. Engagements with citizens are crucial. We see that sometimes there's not sufficient two-way. And the whole saga about tolls in Gauteng is a good example of insufficient engagement with public. The public was not against paying tolls. But when it was removed one morning suddenly and they see they have to pay 66 cents per kilometer, and driving up and down between Johannesburg and Pretoria is about 100 kilometers, that means 66 rand a day. Then suddenly the whole sentiment around paying toll changed, you see. So if you engage the public and say, hi guys, we need proper roads. This is the engine of our economy. Let's start with 16 cents or something, you know. Then you might have pulled it through. But we see that often projects fail because of the fact that there's not proper engagement. So going back to the notion of the social contract, because the social contract is important here. That's why we created the state. The state did not create us. We created the state. And it is not born from the conscience of rulers or the free will of citizens, but it is based on prescriptive legal structure with systemic mechanisms. If the state was not there, life will be poor, brutish, nasty, and short. We created the state because we want order in society, and we want those executive functions. So, in contemplation, and this is a new concept I tried to build. What are we looking at? We are looking at evidence-based leadership. The way that leaders act and the decisions they make to be based on evidence. And what does this simply mean? It means inform and guide leadership decisions and behaviors. identify and understand problems and questions. Much of this in any case happens. It's just the whole way that leaders operate in many spheres need to be dependent to a greater extent on evidence. Develop and appreciate SWOT analysis. Critically analyze the quality and relevance of information. Search and use relevant sources, including peers, specialists, and so on. Gain knowledge and understanding from comparable studies. Identify best practices and strategies. Realistic goals. Monitor and evaluate processes. Learn from feedback. Adapt to changing situations. We've referred again to today to climate change and its impact. Evaluation studies. Study, not only monitor, study input, study outcomes, and move to impact if possible. And the impact studies is the difficult one. Often things are called impact, but it's not really. Impact studies. Stay updated with the new sources, and then something for leaders. Leaders should not rely on intuition, assumption, and anecdotes. Rather rely on data, facts, and logic. Avoid biases, repetitive errors, and myths. This could undermine the effectiveness and, of course, the reputation or credibility of leaders. And improve leadership skills, and again, the link here, by looking at what our research say about leaders. Study the vast body of leadership research. In conclusion then, research can make a consistent and a important contribution to decision making and to leaders. But what is important is it needs to be evidence-based. We need quality evidence, and for quality evidence, of course, we need quality research. Going back into the philosophy of a few thousand years, the relevance of the Platonic notion is still there, and we need to understand that government is not just a piece of machinery, but it is the quality and the essence of it is that is determined by us. The quality and the essence of it is determined by the individuals who constitute it. It's not just the machinery, but we determine how good it is. What is therefore required is to consistently develop the understanding of these officials and to consistently develop their capacity. And this is something that is very old. There's basically three things that's very old in public service capacity building. If we distill it over millennia, the one thing, it is a given. Governments have always trained their people. Secondly, the emphasis in public service training falls on the values and the ethos of the state. In other words, our social contract. Why did we create the state? What we want the state to do for us. And thirdly, public service training and capacity building have always adapted with changing conditions. Industrial revolutions, moving to virtual training, and so on. So those three things is a given within the context of public service learning and capacity building. So what is important then is the way that we reflect and the way that we utilize research. And finally, this whole idea, theory, practice to action. As the philosopher Clausewitz said, theory is not a narrow hedge of principles that show you a shining path. It says what it does, it gives you insight into the great mass of phenomena, such incredible words. It gives you insight into the great mass of phenomena, everything that is out there, and then leaves the mind free to rise into the higher realms of action. So, thank you very much, Chair.
Let's give Prof another round of applause. Prof, I've been listening very much. Got lost in between, but I came back. I must also note that we are going to have discussions that are going to take place shortly after the next presentation is going to take place. But as you are pondering around the issues that Prof has mentioned, Prof left me wondering around the subject of appointment under contract, where you find that the CFOs and the HODs are appointed on a temporary contract, as to whether the appetite to invest in an infrastructure that takes long, which means that the basis of the infrastructure that they need to work on lasts longer than their contract, then the appetite becomes lesser in committing to that, because they want to see value now, and thereby affecting the development of infrastructural work that we see in the environment. I know that we have all noted some of the questions that we want to pose a bit later on. I'm about to present to you Kgaelebale Lili Pukunzi, doctor, who was born and bred in Bloemfontein in the Pahaming location, schooling at Mabewana Primary, Lekhulong Secondary, and matriculated in Lereko. Awarded the winner of the Department of Agriculture and Land Reform and Rural Development external newsletter in 2023. She also published in the QHASA, My Mother's Story, Volume 6, to be published in October of this year. Her academic accolades, amongst others, is a Bachelor of Arts from Vista University, Higher Diploma in Education, BA Honors History in Vista, Postgraduate Diploma in Governance and Politics and Transformation, Master's degree in Governance and Political Transformation, Doctoral degree, Government and Political Transformation. The list goes on. The topic, a governance perspective on policies and practices combating youth unemployment in South Africa. Please help me welcome Dr. Pukunzi.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Program Director, thank you. And allow me to observe the protocol. I'm not sure whether, but let me start by saying all protocol observed. Program Director, if you were to ask for opinions of South Africans out there about leadership in South Africa, or the state, the position of the state currently, the picture that they paint is that one of a state that is weak, a state that is about to collapse. They indicate that we are at a position where we can clearly state that we are at a political decay. And this is because of what we can highlight as poor leadership. A leadership that is dominated by indecision, leadership that is also sometimes unethical, that is the purpose of our presentation today. What is happening? South Africans are yearning. We are yearning for a situation where we can find in leadership game changers. Those are the people who will come up with great ideas. We are looking for people whom we can call strategists, those who will make sense of these ideas, implementers who will make these ideas happen. We are looking for polishers. Those will be the people who will make the ideas brilliant. However, the situation that we are faced with on a daily basis is a situation of self-centered leadership. Leadership of people who sometimes confuses the priorities in terms of when do we allow the self to dominate the organizational values and principles. We are in a situation where people are operating in isolation. We find South Africa with a lot of incompetency and incapacity in leadership. There's a skills shortage. We have leaders who micromanage because of trust issues. People do not trust others. Sometimes they will abuse power. Others will keep information because sometimes they want to avoid embarrassment. When the reality is that when you share, it becomes easy to get solutions to the very same embarrassing situations that we talk of. We have leaders who are arrogant. Some of them, they lack integrity. They are not honest. We have a planning paralysis in South Africa. That is why in most cases, we find ourselves reactive rather than proactive in our approach in leadership. We are not responsive to the needs of the people. There's a problem in terms of political patronage, and some of our leaders are more of followers than leaders. We have leaders who sometimes are very much ignorant of the policies that they have to implement. Some of them are denialists. We can state all these challenges throughout this morning, but they are there, they are realities that we face on a daily basis. We have to understand, or some of our leaders forget that leadership is about influence, leadership is about motivation of others, and to guide followers. If you are indecisive, you are killing the organization. If you are unethical, you impact negatively on the organization. And those are the things or elements that we need in true leadership that will take South Africa somewhere. Leadership should be about promoting organizational values and principles while carrying transformational agenda of organizations that people are leading, because it has to be dominated by real facts. There has to be leaders who share vision. We need leaders who are able to articulate the leadership or the visions of their organizations that they are leading, who communicate, who empathize, who are accountable and responsible, who are able to influence decisions in organizations towards the achievement of the goals that are set. We need effectiveness in leadership. We need planners. Like I indicated, we are at that stage where we can say in terms of planning, there's an element of paralysis in how we do things. We need flexible leaders. And what I like about South Africa is that if you check our policies, you will realize that government and the state is providing the necessary tools for leadership. Government is providing tools that should be, if leaders are incapable, just compliance can help towards achievement of what is needed. When you look at the Constitution, Section 195, it refers to issues of values such as professional ethics. It talks to efficiency. It talks to economic and effective resource usage. It talks to development-oriented administration. It talks to impartial, fair, equitable services, and many others that you can talk. And also when you check also at Section 40 of the same Constitution prescribes decentralization in terms of showing that in governance we have what we call interdependence. We depend on one another. That is why it is very important for leadership to be at the fore. But if leadership is weak, there is a problem. When you look at the NDP, it calls for the promotion of active citizenry to strengthen development, to strengthen democracy and accountability. It calls for leadership that balances the power they hold with responsibility, including listening to and tolerating different and diverse views. These are the tools, what I call the tools, that should be used by leadership in order to achieve decisiveness, in order to minimize unethical conduct within public service. There's also what we call the Intergovernmental Relations Act of 2005, which aims to provide within principle of cooperative government a framework for all organs of state to facilitate coordination in the implementation of policy and legislation. I am highlighting all these policies as a framework because those are support for leadership. And apart from that, they call for, or they support the model that we are trying to promote of network governance, whereby we are calling for government to work together. But as you look at it, you will realize that it's something that is already been there, but maybe the issue of compliance and following what we should be doing is a problem. Currently, the president calls for the district development model as another tool that leadership must use in order to try to bring an alignment in service delivery, in order to ensure that leadership pulls together and and brings about decisive leadership and minimize the issue of indecision. Because when you look at the DDM, it talks for one plan, it talks to one budget. I put this slide because I was engaging someone and they said to me when we were talking about the importance of the district development model and its implementation, someone said to me, but there is the IDP. Why should we have the DDM? It's like your government, it keeps on bringing new models on top of the other. There's no need for the district development model because IDPs are functional. But if you were to look at the two documents, you would realize that the approach in terms of service delivery, it differs. The IDP is what they call the super plan. It is that plan that is run or managed by the municipalities at that level. and it is the responsibility of the municipalities. But when you look at the contents of the IDP, you realize that each department must submit its own independent plan into the IDP. While when you look at the DDM or the district development model, you realize that government is calling for collaboration in a sense that they say that there must be one plan, one budget. Therefore, coordination is happening when you look at the approach that is followed by the district development model. These, I said, are models that can help us to minimize indecisive leadership, models that are there to help us minimize unethical conduct within leadership itself. The DDM, it prioritizes, or it ensures that the national priorities are attended to in localities. It ensures that planning and spending across 3 spheres of government are integrated and aligned. It advocates for development of districts or metro plans that are based on the interests and the inputs of communities. And I am saying this also empowers communities in order to do their responsibility of oversight. I want to pause and take an example, use Jagersfontein as an example maybe, to try to differentiate between the IDP and the DDA by saying if we were to take the situation after the disaster in Jagersfontein and we were to develop plans, intervention plans for the place. When we take the IDP approach, each department will have to sit down somewhere in a boardroom somewhere, have or develop their plan for Jagersfontein without consultation with other departments, and have a plan that they will submit to the municipality, Kopano municipality. Each department will have independent budget, independent implementers and everything. Independently, but they will be working in the same area. When you take the DDM approach says we must all come together, gather like we are gathered here, all departments, and we develop one plan for Jagersfontein in order to ensure that there will be value for money, in order to ensure that there is no element of finding ourselves at clashes, minimize clashes in as far as the implementation plans are concerned in the area. And that way, we will be sure that whatever the outcome, it will be for the benefit of Jagersfontein, because DDM is saying that even the needs that we address, we must not just pull inside a head and say, this is what we should be delivering for Jagersfontein. Instead, we will be able to engage the community themselves. They become part of the planning. They become part, they provide the oversight like I indicated. That way it becomes better and more, the work becomes clean and neat. Unlike where we have 7 programs and then when you have to monitor, it's a challenge. Because you have to monitor all these other plans. You are not sure where the others are, but in DDM, we are able to pull and push from the same angle. That is why we are saying let us promote the issue of networks, because the networks is what government is calling for, like I indicated in the framework or policies that are there. Why do we promote for network governance in leadership? We do this because network governance, when they define network governance, they say, the scientists, they would say that it's a group of interrelated but legally autonomous units that are united by a common goal. So as service providers, because we provide service to the public, it is important that we understand that each and every government department has got its own independent mandate. However, all of us, we want to see service going to the people. So these networks help us. They do not dilute your independence or your autonomy as a department. Network governance, they promote a stable horizontal articulation of independence but operationally autonomous actors who interact through negotiations that involves bargaining, deliberations, and intense power struggles sometimes. I want to talk to the issue of power struggles because remember we spoke about the involvement of communities, and we know, we have observed when you watch TV how much angry most of our communities are. That is why the issue of power. Entities fuse for the collaborative public good and service provision with collective policy making that is based on principle of trust, reciprocity, negotiations, and mutual interdependence of actors. So this is how network governance is explained or defined. It calls for interdependent working relations. It calls for integration in service delivery. Furthermore, network governance, it builds interdependent relations, like I've already indicated. All role players stay autonomous, because I know sometimes the question of power is always a challenge, where people think that when you work with others, they are going to take some of your power away, you are losing your independence. Networks say that you remain who you are within the unit. We share resources, we share expertise, we share skills in network governance, and then the responsibilities are in line with specialization. There's regular monitoring and evaluation, and it enables citizens to do the oversight. It decentralizes power, because some of us are unable to manage this power. So it's better to have it in line with specialization. Your power is based on what you specialize in. The common C's that you would find when you promote network governance are always, pardon me, I love color. That's why you will see my slides are pink and, just. But the common C's that you would find in network governance are the question of consultation. It's always important to consult. You need to communicate regularly. It calls for collaboration, and all these aspects, when you look at them, are aspects that our policies in South Africa always calls for. We need to work together. There has to be cooperation between or amongst stakeholders or role players. There has to be coordination of service. There has to be collective ownership of processes. Because I'm talking about networks, I've decided to put in so many shapes and whatever, so that you understand that indeed we are talking networks. But what is important with network governance at a strategic level, because I've already indicated that this is in line, or when you look at network governance, is aligned to the district development model. You'll realize that the key stakeholders in network governance will always be your state, the society, academia, and private sector. And Professor has already indicated how important academia is in governance and in public service. I've also put labor as an independent entity, but you can put labor as part of the social sector if you want. Why is it important? You will realize that for us to achieve that one plan that we are talking about in the district development model, The state is there to ensure that there are relevant policies and they regulate policies. The society, that will be our arena where we'll be able to identify the projects that needs to happen and also identify the needs of the society. We will analyze what is it that needs to happen, and we'll formulate plans based on the needs of society themselves. The academia, the professor has already alluded to many things, but that's where we will source our knowledge, our research, and the skills to say what is it that needs to happen. Private sector, they need to bring in issues of investment, the markets, and we are stating here that infrastructure can also be contributed by the private sector, because that's where the money is. As much as we agree that government can provide infrastructure, the reality is money resides with private sector. Therefore, they have a role to play in as far as delivery of infrastructure is concerned. The labor, they will always bargain for the rights and the interests of the people. And then this is almost the same, but it's at the implementation level. That's why when we talk about the society, will always say that's the arena, because that's where things will be happening. And then we will say the state will play the role of the enabler, because they need to ensure that the environment is conducive for us to function and operate. Private sector must invest, and then academia will always be our informer. They'll need to provide capacity building. They will have to provide data and analysis of this data and process it so that it can be used effectively. In this way, when we plan and we work this way, it helps government in terms of the minimizing resistance, because you would realize that now their vision will be common from the onset. Everyone, all role players will understand the vision and the modus operandi because they've been involved from the onset. The responsibilities and roles will be shared amongst the role players according to what they have, according to their mandate. And then this way, even the risks mitigation, it will be easy to mitigate the risks. The monitoring and evaluation happens and oversight. Remembering that here we are implementing projects with all the C's that I've spoken about. This is what we call network governance that shows interdependence and collective leadership in decision making. The disadvantages of this model is that there's always the need to balance between excessive and insufficient control. It can be a challenge in the implementation of this model. Also, there's a chance of mismanagement of power and abuse of it in situations where power is involved. Network governance processes are sometimes time-consuming and may lead to slow pace in terms of service delivery. Therefore, if you were to take or approach public service delivery, you need to ensure that your planning happens in time in order to curb some of these challenges that I'm talking about. It is prone to failure, which might compromise government efficiency. But what are the benefits? The issue of inclusion of other role players provides basis for organizations to become self-regulate and self-governing. Distributed control simplifies decision-making into less complex tasks. Liabilities and responsibilities of role players are reduced together with the volume of data that they have to absorb and process, because now every role player takes a portion of these responsibilities and liabilities. It creates a systemic way to engage stakeholders. It allows stakeholders to become core regulators of the organization to directly negotiate rectification of any concerns with management. It establishes systemic processes for stakeholders to provide feedback intelligence on the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of an organization and its members. It provides for independent cross-checking of management reports. It provides systemic processes for accessing information missed or not known by managers. It provides a requisite variety of channels to ensure integrity of information. It provides systemic, simple, economic, and safe way to facilitate creditable whistleblowing. And it provides more economic and effective way to enhance operations for government-owned businesses than selling them. It incorporates the improved problem-solving and planning capabilities and enhances flexibility, adaptability, and efficiency due to increased number of thinkers and perspectives. In terms of decentralization, I've spoken about this issue of decentralizing the power distribution based on responsibility, and then the issue of collective decision-making based on expertise will be an advantage in public service. It reduces corruption, which is linked to unethical conduct. It enhances government efficiency and effectiveness by producing regulations for a more proactive and flexible nature, by increasing the quality of policy decisions, enhancing cooperation, and reducing implementation resistance. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say South Africa must minimize unethical conduct and indecision to build a trust and enable citizens to have faith in government processes. The achievement of this lies with open, transparent, accountable leadership, which is profiled through network governance. Good governance must be on every leader's agenda. I thank you.
Yeah. We are now at that time. A lot of colleagues where we work, often enough they say these colloquiums are talk shows and are not practical. They lack the necessary practical examples that can take them forward. At this particular point, we're just going to merge this practicality by inviting Prof. over here and that good doctor, Pukunsi, to come and take on the questions that we have been noting. I note that some of our principals are here. They would also be able to respond to the sweet and sour presentation by Dr. Pukunsi by raising questions that are actually to the core. Please, a round of applause as they come through to take on the questions. As the presentation have been unfolding, it kept me thinking a bit. National Treasury has issued a moratorium on filling of the posts on traveling, and a number of things. And Prof, the impact of it in the Free State, where it depends mainly on the procurement, government being the biggest procurer in the private sector, how do we actually make sure that as we issue out instructions, we observe the impact, the negative impact that comes with those particular instructions? To be able to deal with quite a number of issues that we have raised here. I mean, the private sector, the hotels industry have been crying foul already to say we are hosting mainly in those particular areas. How do we put a system in place that will ensure that the biggest impact is minimized while obtaining the desired outcome? Secondly, there is an issue around the minimum budget that the departments are receiving year in and year out. How do we make sure that through the research methodologies or in a shortest possible time, we are able to identify the 20% area that this amount of money can be invested in and gain the 80% which we need to deal with? So those are the key questions that I have with regard to some. I'm trying to stimulate the discussion that we're going to have currently. Please note that in this auditorium, we have hanging mics here. So as you raise your hand and speak, try to raise your voice. You will be audible enough to be able to address some of these issues. Can I see by show of hands? Yeah. Noted, noted. I have 3 hands before we receive responses. Rather. Yes.
I think this one is directed to
Just before you start, let me ask that as you pose your question, you give your name and the organization that you are coming from, and then be able to pose those particular questions to give context to your question. Thanks.
I thought I would shoot from the hip, so I will not be known in the end. Thank you very much. My name is Sapoki Ramorena. I'm from the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development in the Free State. Prof indicated on his slides that sometimes you end up conducting a longitudinal record study. But it is my central thesis that in public service, you will not get the chance of the luxury to conduct that. Maybe aligning it with what he said, because of the temporal nature of our appointments or some senior management appointments. For you to conduct a study that will run like over 10 years or 15 years, by that time you'll long been gone. And that is very unfortunate, Prof, because sometimes some of the ideas you have, drawing back from the strategic intent you want to steer the organization towards, unfortunately, you don't get to realize that as after 5 years or so, your contract is over, and all those nice things that you wanted to implement cannot be realized. But of course, Prof, there is this other issue that I think it's a contentious debate in academia among scholars of research. You were reflecting on research approaches as your topic, but you referred to a case study. I'm arguing that a case study is a research design. Some scholars like Creswell will classify that as a research design, but if you look at Ranjit Kumar and other Salkin, they will always refer to it differently. So maybe just from an academic point of view, my question is, will you classify a case study as a research design or as an approach? I thank you.
All right. Bro Moses.
Just my comment and questions, Chair, to both the speakers. Firstly, Prof, as I was listening to you, I ended up asking myself 3 or 4 questions. And the first question is, from your observation, how serious does leadership in government take evidence-based research? And maybe linked to that, the second question is there any empirical evidence that links government policy decisions to research? Sometimes you get a sense that government decisions and policy making is stamp-set. But maybe if there is any empirical evidence, because for me, especially for the benefit of researchers, it could be daunting, to be sitting and doing all of this work when it doesn't amount to anything from a decision-making point of view. And Chair, having been worked maybe in a sustainable resource management environment, my understanding is that the ultimate objective is allocating efficiency, which is a very simple economic objective. And I'm of the view that without sound research and without leadership that understands and values the importance of research, that allocated efficiency will remain a smoke dream, for the better part. And then maybe just my opinion, lastly, to Prof, is that when I look at the examples that you have mentioned, the ETOs, the inadequate budgets for defense and ESCOM and so on, it points to a potential gap between research and research allocation, resource allocation. And for me, the key is how do we close that particular gap? And coming to Dr. Kunzi, the subject that you presented is on inculcating network governance. And I've listened to what you have had to say, but for me, the nuts and bolts are in the how part of it. And that is not what I got clearly from the presentation in terms of saying, if this model is so good and we have to utilize it, how then do we begin to put it together, especially within the Free State context? And lastly, what I didn't also get was, yes, this is a proposed model, but has it worked anyway? Has it been tested anyway? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let me allow the panel to respond to those ones, and in the next round I will start with you. Prof?
Yes, I appreciate the debate. I appreciate the issues raised and the questions, and I think it is very good to also challenge notions around the issue of budgets and how to budget. Can I leave? That is a very, very difficult thing. And to be honest, I don't have the answers. Because how do you prioritize? How do you prioritize within the context of you as a province? And specifically within the context of you as the provincial treasury, with a number of local authorities that have real challenges around you. And with the idea of maintaining important systems, yet also systems of government, yet also supporting needs in communities, as well as providing to the private sector who is also supporting you through their taxes, and make sure that they get business that are channeled through state. Isn't that a difficult one? So what can we say here, and what can we really think about in terms of solving such a problem? And as a researcher, of course, one thinks back at situations where countries experienced difficulties and how they went about managing their difficulties over a process of time. The first lesson that we can learn, it does not happen in a day. The problems are not problems that are solved in a day. After the Korean War, more than 60 years ago, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. It is not that for a long time. So what did they do? And there's two things that one can take out here from that example. And the one is long-term planning, plans that were made over a long period. 20-year plan broken down in 5-year plans. However, the first plan was a 6-year plan and not a 5-year plan. And the second one is the notion of symbiosis. And in their case, what does it mean? It means symbiosis between the government or the state and the private sector and academia. The Koreans decided they want a car, but they did not have the know-how. So they bought a Nissan or a Toyota or something from Japan, and they took it apart and said, but listen here, we can manufacture this. But they did not have tracks to drive this car on to test it, and they did not know how you test it. So they got a few guys from universities to assist them with testing that one highway between Busan and Seoul. And they blocked the highway and they did speed tests, and of course 2/3 of South Korea's mountains, and they drove the car into the mountains with these stables they developed, and that's how they started with their motor industry. The same with shipbuilding. They could build trawlers and medium-sized ships, but now they build a model of an oil tanker, and they went internationally trying to sell building of oil tankers, say they can build. So they got a Greek ship Typhoon, I don't know if it was Onassis, to say, build me an oil tanker. But they don't have a shipyard, a dry dock that's big enough. But they have to build an oil tanker. So they decided, rather than to build this thing in total, while we are preparing the dry dock, we are building the tanker in components. Isn't that the way shipbuilding is going today? So they built it in components while they complete the dry dock, and by the time the dry dock was complete, they could assemble the different components that they have created for the ship, and the plates were welded and so on. So with this goes, going back to the notion of planning. The first 6-year plan of South Korea was only for basic education. Basic. So the guys that fell into the generation, why? To prepare people to work in heavy industries. The skills that you need. And then the next was into more advanced industry. So now you got guys in the second 5-year plan with better technical skills. And the next 5-year plan was electronic skills. And of course the next 5-year plan was into those things that we understand that relates to the 4th Industrial Revolution. So if you were in that specific generation, you were prepared for that specific role. All societies cannot do that, eh? We cannot do that. We don't plan like that. And we would not plan like that. There was also a World Bank study looking at, and I'm wrapping my brain, thinking of the variables, looking at countries that after the Second World War had more than 3 decades of growth. And what are the variables that made this possible? The one thing, of course, was planning. The other thing was good governance. The other thing was efficient budgeting and provision of budgets. And then there was, of course, producing what the markets require, focusing on producing what the markets require, and placing your emphasis in terms of your production, what you know that there is a market for. So there were 7 variables in this report. I will have it somewhere, but I remember seeing those things. So to answer this question is is very difficult in terms of how do we go about budgeting, how do we go about prioritizing. The important notion, as I have started off, is not in short-termism. The important idea is crises are usually things that last a while. And we need to consider that this will last a while, and how do we prioritize? How do we prioritize supporting the public sector, which is important, versus supporting communities in needs and getting local authorities to do what they need to do? And there's a lot of simple things that I've already mentioned, from good governance right through to the presentation that the good doctor did on leadership and effective and efficient leadership. Then in terms of research design, research approaches, I just use the term approach here as a generic a heading, because one needs heading. One could also say methodologies. But again, there's the same sensitivities in terms of case studies to say, but you cannot speak of a case study methodology. So yes, there's a lot of semantics around research and what do we call research. Some would refer to the term a case method. And specifically when it comes to teaching and learning, the term case method would be used, whereas other academics will say, no, case studies is not a methodology. The issue of longitudinal studies, yes, for sure, that's a difficult thing to do. But we need reliable data and information over a period of time. So what is important for us to do is for statistics to be kept up. And to actually write good reports that have in-depth information. So that is what is important. And also, probably, if we look at reports on relevant data, is to have structured data reporting. In other words, to say, this is the type of data that we know is important for us to monitor the sphere. And one of the areas where we see we've had results in such monitoring over periods without necessarily doing a longitudinal study is in managing, well, I know this, you don't have the sea, but from an agricultural point of view, I don't know if the same is perhaps true of managing game. But in terms of managing fish, we've collected good data over a period of time, and we have succeeded in effectively managing our fish resource, to know when our fish resource is in trouble, to know which species is now out of trouble, to know where the fish is moving, because with climate change, fish is moving, crayfish, for example, move towards the south coast. So just by collecting good data and writing thorough reports, scientific reports, over a period of years, we actually have the data that we could call longitudinal studies. So there was also a question of evidence value and the value of research evidence in decision making. That's something one could go into depth. Yes, research is often used, and I know for social policy development, research have been used to develop policies in terms of social provisioning. But one thing, again, excuse me that I use a coastal example, but good bathymetry research, in other words, research on the depth of oceans as well as the movement of water, was done in ports. And in the 1970s, in the port of Saldanha, or Saldanha Bay, they built a wall and they built a jetty. The jetty is 4.6 kilometers long. The wall links an island, Marcus Island, or island to the mainland, and that is just over 2 kilometers long. And then for big ships, they had to dredge to allow big ships to come into the jetty. Now you can imagine, this messed up. I nearly used another word. The coastal area, and the beaches start washing away. And people that invested in beach houses in Langebaan suddenly found that where they had a dune in front of them, they now had sea properties. I mean, really, properties that were in the water. So they took the research that was done now, recent research, very serious in terms of now managing the water flow in the bay. So there are cases where we look at research and where we apply the research. You see, this is where I started off to say, but problems are interdisciplinary. You have fish here, you have valuable properties, you've got fish factories, you've got a port, and you've got the ecological things, because this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of the massive saltwater lagoon. So now what you do, you have to balance all of these interests in the way that you go about, from the economic to the ecological interest, of course, to the interest of a working port. So, so that's a good example of how interdisciplinary approaches were applied to manage it. The problems have not gone away, it's still being managed. Then there was something about a gap between resources and something else. I'm not sure what, sorry, I'm a Munamakulu, eh? I need to change my glasses. Sorry, what was the issue of the gap? Moses, the gap. You said something about a gap between resources and... And? Oh, and decision making. Yeah, I think I addressed it here, but you know that whole issue of doctoring research. I have been in that position. I see my colleague is kind of having a smile, because we often do research, and then we do research on what this room should look like, but the guy that actually asked us to do the research wants to replace the carpet. And then we have to, in the conclusion, write something off the carpet. But you see, you miss the whole logic in your research process. You miss the whole logic of actually investigating all of these variables around you, from the sound to the virtual capacity of the room to the angle of the seats, because now your conclusion is on the carpet. So yes, that's the unfortunate thing, and I think that's the dilemma for researchers and researchers. That's why with evidence-based decision-making goes this whole thing of ethics, and the importance then of ethical-based leadership. And the good doctor have said quite a few things that also relates to the notion of ethics. I hope I have answered some of the issues, guys. Thank you.
No. Yes, I thought you would also wait for some more of those ones and then respond to them later. All right. No, thank you very much. I want to take the last round of questions. Advocate to me, congratulations, and thank you for being around. And I hope so much that you will have a question in this last round. Over to you, Brother Steve.
No, thank you very much. I must also appreciate the two presentations, very informative. Just one other issue you've already responded to, the issue of I'm involved in issues of budgeting, so it has been our problem, the issue of we've been pushing for allocating a budget based on your research, evidence-based budgeting. But I can tell you it's a difficult one. I agree with you as we have put it forward now. I think we've covered that one. Then the other issue that I wanted to raise was the issue of you alluded earlier on to just want to check this. You spoke to the issue of training, the relationship between training and service delivery, and also between technology and service delivery. So I'm really interested on the one of training and service delivery. And in this context, service delivery, I define it as your public servants in terms of their skills, being ethical, and also being capable officials of government. So you also raised two issues that we are already offering so much training in terms of developing public servants. And I can also indicate to you that the spending that we are inherent in terms of training is quite huge in government. So now the question for me is that if you look at the two, you have the School of National Government offering training. I can tell you are very much accessible. At any time you can get your website and look for a course that you want to do, and you are so responsive in terms of that. We're also spending so much in terms of training. So in your perspective as NSQ, what would be the problem for us as government to at least have these capable, skilled, and ethical public servants? Because they are very scarce. We don't see them. You know, we talk about the wage bill of government that is ballooning year in, year out. But it's so difficult just to get these kind of public servants who are ethical, capable, and just ready to deliver services. What would be the problem from the perspective of NSG?
Next question. Noted. Do we have another question? One of the, just to take it also on the issue that Steve has raised now, is that the effects of economical impact on ethics in the government sector, that the more pressure government officials receive economically, are they becoming more ethical or are they becoming unethical in the process? So this is why we find this type of issues that we are dealing with at the moment. I saw a hand there. Yes.
I appreciate her effort in understanding that part of what we should be doing as government is to try to collaborate or to network with others. In fact, if you look at SDG number 70, it's what encourages government to do if we were to achieve the 2030 agenda, partnership with others. The model is basically centering around that. But, and the Chinese are very good in that. In fact, if you go to China, the first word that you hear is Guanxi, 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 connection, the issue of connection. They will never deal with you unless you are connected with another person or somebody else. But my argument here is that in her conceptual framework, she seems to be going very light under the social arena on those partnerships, on the civil society, on what maybe my friend behind here, my good advocate, will refer to as social enterprises in social development sphere. So I'm just saying, perhaps we need to blow this horn quite louder if government is to begin or is to start working with other private partners, even organized social entities outside the sphere of what is considered the private sector, because she's saying, in her view, the private sector has got the money, can mobilize. But that is it's not only about it. I mean, social capital theory is very particular to say it is in our joint effort, it is in our connectedness, on our samverken, that we can always achieve best. So the social capital that we can actually enjoy by working with others such as universities in particular. You know, if universities' budgets or their monies are shrinking because they were relying heavily in the past on the first revenue streams. Now, current third revenue streams are important. So if we were to work with such institutions, we can achieve more actually, and we can even tap into their broad body of knowledge in terms of how they do things. That can also help us in government because we can really always learn from them. So I was just saying, on her part, she should not really undermine the rich reservoir of knowledge and capital that social enterprises and other actors in the third sector can actually contribute in realizing the broad goals in terms of the SDGs and others. Yes.
No, thank you very much. That would mark the last question before I ask the doctor to come and present. I take it that you have taken the words out of advocate to address that particular subject. Yeah. Advocate, over to you.
What you're talking about, and there's no margin for waffle. But I appreciate quite apt and cogent points raised by the prof and the doctor there. I agree fully with regard to issues relating to the quality of research, the quality of evidence. But let us just, just go back quickly and say, how did we get here as a country? Did we commit serious own goals, or were things that we were planning not properly research or evidence-based? Let's go in terms of our own economic policies. As a young democracy, we are told that we started with RDP, which was a Reconstruction and Development Plan. In no time, then we went to GAIR. And I always argue that GAIR was not universally embraced, even in the ruling party or governing party. Was attacked seriously by the alliance partners and whatnot and so on and so forth. In no time, we went to new growth plan. Then in no time, we have NDP 2030 with very ambitious kind of goals and aspirations. And our horizon being 2030. Okay, which is something like 6.5 years to go or so. And we are having things which you are saying, some of those that eradication of poverty or inequality or unemployment and so on. And I said, wherever I said yesterday, I said I observed the day before yesterday when unceremoniously the review, the 10-year review of NDP was cancelled. And I happened to have had sight of it, and I realized it was not very kind on us, that review. And as the Free State now, we are at a level where, and the country, we are at a level where we are supposed to be doing what we call a 30-year review of how have we done things and so on. And whatever I said I appreciate that that will have to be informed by the lived experience of our people, because we cannot sit and sing own praises yourself. It has to be informed scientifically by the lived experiences of our people. To tell us, to say, you did what you were supposed to do or not. So those are the kind of situations that we are finding ourselves there to say, these kind of changes, today we have a very, very serious kind of austerity measures, wherein if you don't spend, you won't grow. But you can't spend recklessly because you put the country on the precipice. So it's very serious. The question is, how did we get there? It's a question of what the doctor has raised in terms of the leadership or lack thereof. You know, I appreciated when she started. Her characterization of leadership is vicious, extremely vicious, and correctly so. And I wish our leaders would have been here to hear you say such things. And I don't take anything away from how you characterized us as public servants, because we are entrusted and we are the face of what has to manifest on the ground. So it's a very serious thing. And I heard the former president saying, when we say the failure of the state is the failure of public administration, and it's us. So I think that's my general input in terms of what is happening here. But was there a disjuncture in terms of evidence-based research? Did we hit what we were supposed to do? Or we are here because of very serious kind of own goals? And just to put it here, let me that I say, and I still maintain, we scored very brilliant goals, but we did very serious blunders and we missed very easy goals too. And we did very many also own goals in us trying to get where we are supposed to be. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. I know my people. When I call them, they respond. Doc, over to you.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm short in words. You know, I wish I was like Prof. And talk and render a clear speech for in response to the questions that were asked. Abdisa Boki. I just want to thank you for the comment, and what you say is very much valued and it's noted. Yet for the presentation that we were to do today, one had to, you know, compact, everything, and with the hope that one will just have to go through it. However, it is noted. Thank you very much, sir. And Abdullah, I wanted to call him by name and I forgot his name. And I know that I know Abdul also. Abdul, the issue of network governance in South Africa. In South Africa, when you look at it, it's what government is gravitating towards, what government is trying to advocate. Because when you look at our policy content, you would find that every policy, when it opens with a call for integrated, you call it development, you call it service delivery, but government is calling for collaboration of all entities, be it local government, provincial government, and national government, be it private sector. All of our policies, they gravitate towards network governance. However, the challenge is that we are reluctant to implement. That is why when I started, I said that I'm not bringing in something that is new. I'm bringing in something that is there. but that we are unable to put into practice because it is prescribed. We are public servants, we must just apply. That is why I said, when we talk about it, even the issue of unethical leadership and what is the indecisiveness, it's all about compliance. If we were to comply with what we have, we were going to be online or on track. And then the other thing was about whether is it tested, is there some way? If you look at how it's done, in South Africa we don't have it, but where they apply it in small projects. That's why I made an example with Jagersfontein. There's a need for us to start and to start somewhere. So we can start this program to see whether it works, because everyone, our government is calling for network governance, though they don't say it's network governance. But when they say you must collaborate, remember all the C's that I spoke about. It's what government is preaching. Therefore, we can start with small projects and put it into test. It does not mean when we don't have a specific government that we can say this particular government has implemented this model. It won't work. Can we start small and grow from there? I think, yeah, we can go somewhere, because the greatest enemy we have is our psychology. Our mindset is still embedded in our history, and that is killing us in terms of moving forward, because when we have to move, there's always an element of fear to say, what if? So that is one thing that is limiting us. But I believe that as South African, we can go somewhere if we only work together as collaborative units. I thank you.
Yeah, let's give the doctor and prof a round of applause. You had another question that was raised there, Prof. Yes, please.
Thank you, colleagues. I really appreciate the debate. This is as a public servant, we often do not get to the debate and the variety of issues. This whole issue of linking the variables is quite an interesting question also in research, because in research we also have to link something with something else. So link training to service delivery, link technology to service delivery. Just something briefly on technology and service delivery. The fourth industrial revolution is not a rumor, although people not like some specialists like Knopfler say that we're actually in the third industrial revolution. It's not so. The interconnectedness between things, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence specifically, shows us that this is a new industrial revolution, and certainly a separate industrial revolution. But what do we do? How do we utilize technology for service delivery? You know, I come from the West Coast, and I know the communities up the coast. You're going to lose your will to deliver services if you try and apply high technology solutions. You might apply them in Sunnyside, in Pretoria, or wherever, but you're not going to do it in the Richtersveld. So you need an appropriate high-low mix with applying technology. Apply high technology where you can, and low technology solutions where it's appropriate. A good case study that we have done a few years ago was on utilizing technology at the HIV dispensary pharmacy at the Alan Joseph Hospital, the biggest HIV clinic in South Africa. At that stage, they served 26,000 people. They had a waiting time of about 3 hours, 40 minutes at the dispensary. So what did the pharmacists do? They just rushed around and gathered the medicine and wanted the person to leave as soon as possible. So they put a robot in the dispensary to pack the medicine, and they digitized the records. Not very high technology, So the waiting time now is 12 minutes. Nobody lost their jobs because people that pack the dispensary still now label the medicine for the robot to read. But the waiting time is 12 minutes, and while the robot now packs the medicine and it comes down in a chute, the pharmacists look at the patient and say, hey, remember, if you use this, you cannot drink, or whatever is important with medicine. So the unintended outcome was now more time also between the pharmacy and the patient. So we need to embrace technology and use it where we can to improve our service delivery, but we always need to take cognizance of the complexities of our society and our ILO mix. The whole issue of training and service delivery is interesting, because we have seen sometimes officials that have had the most training are the most inept when they have to do their job. So what is the problem then? And last year I spoke to a guy from Senegal at an international conference, and he translated his concepts from French into English. And he said to me, you know, one of the biggest problems with our public administration or our public services on the continent is this thing, in his words, and he called it indifference. And I thought, this is quite interesting. Perhaps one can do a study on indifference. Why are we indifferent about what we have to do? We know what we have to do, and we know what is necessary, but the will is often lacking. So government is a complex machine, and we understand when we work with rands, budgets, when we work with technology and machines, we understand that, and we understand our problems. So we have the cognitive and the affective domain. The cognitive domain is what we know. The cognitive domain is we know the budgets, the rands and cents, and the challenges that we have. But the affective domain is, how do I feel about it? How do I feel about the work that I must do? Am I indifferent, if I may use our colleague from Senegal's words? Am I indifferent towards what I have to do? So the affective domain then sometimes becomes more important than the cognitive, than the machines and the rands and cents. It's like Plato said, it's not a machine. It's the people that constitutes this machine that makes it effective or not effective. In terms of research and the NDP, yes, I've often wondered about this, specifically now with the 10-year review and the review report that's in some ways condemning in terms of the achievements. And I often wondered about the diagnostic process and what came out of it, and asked the question, did we ask the right questions when we did this research, you know? I'll get back to this. The RDP and policies that emanated from the first decade of us becoming a democracy. I think what was important, this is just a personal view, in the policies and the regulatory framework we created, we came from this terrible past, and we said we've got an idea or an ideal society, a dream of a society we wanted to go to. And we built policies around that. But we should have, in the meantime, said, let's build a regulatory framework around the realistic challenges that we face now, and not necessarily the ideal in which we are striving to achieve. I don't know. Again, I don't know. I'm just saying these things because one tried to make sense. You try to understand it. The problem, of course, with much of this is the notion from strategy to action. We develop strategy, we develop plans, but the lacking thing is the action. And sometimes the lacking thing is not allowing it to go to its logical conclusion, not allowing it to come really to fruition. We start with another one. And perhaps our 30 years lived experience will show that we've had good plans, but it was every time interrupted by new plans, by new approaches, and that we did not allow it to go to its logic conclusion. Our research must be honest here, you know, this whole notion of honesty in research. So we will find things that we don't like, but that's fine. because this is a journey. This is a journey of us as people and of us as a state. The good doctor, Dr. Pukonsi, do I pronounce it correct? Dr. Pukonsi mentioned very, very important, made a very important remark now, I think. And that is starting small and grow. And what can we say in troubling times, you know? What did Napoleon say in facing military challenges? Advance, consolidate. Advance, consolidate. Move from secure base to a secure base. I really don't know, but that point is important, to see which gains we can make, consolidate on them, and grow from there, because certainly this challenges we face is not going to be away tomorrow. We will have to manage them. So, thank you, Chair.
No, thank you very much, Prof. and Dr. Pukunsi. We now have come to the end of the first session, and I take it that some of us who might not necessarily have been, I just want to check in the question and answer on the online if we have dealt with all the issues that are raised there. In the event we have not, during the break time we will have those questions. We will also share them with you. And then during the plenary, when we are now discussing some of the issues, we'll then share it so that at least the response can be given at that time. Allow me also to say that it is through these particular platforms that we are having in a colloquium that we have an opportunity to reflect, pose our questions to the professionals in the academia, and also in the environment at which we work in, that we become much smarter, better, and we can be able to execute our functions with ease going forward. There are certain areas that we currently dealing with within government. The budget is minimum. The structures are still the same. We see duplications in every other department where you find that every department has an HR unit. Every department has an IT unit. And the level of capacity in those vary from one department to the other. The other department has a webmaster who understands the web. It's a vacancy in another department. For them to be able to achieve immediate gain now, they must first follow the recruitment process without the collaboration that the doctor is talking about, to say, write a letter to another department, call that person, come here, let's deal with the matters that we ought to deal with, and then resolve that, because you are employed by government, not necessarily by the department. So there are quite a number of dynamics that are taking place in different other areas to deal with them. Ponder over them. The engine is still very warm. We are going on. We'll then put some of these particular matters on the table so that we can raise our questions, see our way forward, because I am telling you now, if we continue the way we are, we will not achieve anything different. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm requested to announce that it is tea time now. In the hotel school.